Gillian Sankoff's PhD at McGill University was in 1968, Social Aspects of Multilingualism in New Guinea, based on her fieldwork there in 1966-67. She taught for the next 11 years at the Université de Montréal, where with Henrietta Cedergren and David Sankoff, they carried out a sociolinguistic study of Montreal French. This study was replicated in 1984 and again in 1995, creating a longitudinal corpus that she continued to work on. Noteworthy publications include The Social Life of Language of 1981, and with Bill Labov, Conversations with Strangers, 2023, and the 2019 article in Language, Language Change Across the Lifespan, Three Trajectory Types. Labov joined the Penn faculty in 1971, and Sankoff arrived in 1979. Jointly, they built the Sociolinguistics program there, and were fortunate to teach several generations of wonderful students, one of whom we just heard from. And so, Martha's Vineyard at the inception of sociolinguistics, Labov's The Social Motivation of Sound Change.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Can everybody hear me? Have I got my sound on?
Yes.
Good, okay. Well, good afternoon, and I would like to greet and thank everyone who's listening to me, especially Kirk. I really enjoyed your talk just now. And I'd also like to thank the International Linguistic Association for the invitation to speak at this session and celebrate this important anniversary for Word. The social motivation of sound change has been considered a founding document for linguists whose work has developed in various different ways over the subsequent 60 plus years. Sometimes I think of the parallel in the parable of the blind man and the elephant. One person grabbed the elephant's tail and says, "Oh, this elephant is very like a rope." And another, touching the leg, finds the elephant to be like a pillar. For a third, coming up against the side of the elephant's body, it most resembles a wall, and his ear is kind of like a fan, and so on. So as with the elephants, social motivation of sound change has also been many things to many people. What is important about it? It's grounding in actual language use in the speech of an entire community, or it's cutting-edge scientific methodology, the rigor of its quantitative analysis. It's a demonstration that we can study ongoing language change in the present, as opposed to relying only on the historical written record. Or, as the title boldly states, that we can locate the social forces that motivate language change. The answer, of course, is that it's all of these things. In this talk, I'd also like to draw on the longer study it's based on, which is Bill's unpublished study of his MA thesis at Columbia University in 1962, which has been unpublished ever since. And I'm currently working with Sherry Ash on that 166-page document to see if we can make it available to scholars who would be interested in reading it, because it has a great deal more detail than was put into this paper. Bill presented his first paper, The Social Motivation of Sound Change, at the 1962 linguistic meeting. I was not there myself. I just said I graduated in 1964. So I have it on good authority that it did receive a standing ovation at that meeting. So I didn't hear it, nor did I read it when it was published in Word a year later in 1963. Now, more than 60 years later, we all may well wonder what the linguists of the early 1960s made of this study. Why were they so excited? Because they were excited. Clearly, it was electrifying for many people who did read it then. Sally Tagliamonte's book called Making Waves cites an early pioneer, Ron Macaulay, who had been on leave at a small university in Wales when he came across that issue of Word in the linguistics department library. Ron told me this is the first time that anybody had ever made any sense about the relationship between the way people talk, the way people spoke, and what they thought or believed about everything else. So, I mean, this was a total revelation for me. And I knew from then on that that's what I wanted to do. And he did. He kept on doing something like that. So, wait, let's see. He was indeed a pioneer in sociolinguistics, and like Bill, his research always put the speakers whose language he documented at the forefront of writing about it, such as we can see in his 2005 book, Extremely Common Eloquence, Constructing Scottish Identity Through Narrative. Now, before we turn to the study of Martha's Vineyard itself, it's important to clarify that Bill undertook this research in order to explore his view of the nature of language change. He writes that, where have I lost my page? He writes that the problem of explaining linguistic change seems to resolve itself into three separate problems. First, the origin of linguistic variations. Second, the spread and propagation of linguistic changes. And third, the regularity of linguistic change. He made it clear from the beginning that linguistic variation had to be at the root of language change, and that this variation itself stems from many sources. So it could be have as its origin process of assimilation or differentiation, analogy, borrowing, fusion, contamination, and any number of processes in which the language spoken, the language system interacts with the physiological or psychological characteristics of the individual. So problem one of this subset of three is the origin of linguistic variations. Well, linguistic variations can come from a wide variety of sources, processes of assimilation or differentiation, analogy, borrowing, fusion, contamination, or as he puts it, any number of processes in which the language system interacts with the physiological or psychological characteristics of the individual. So problem two on the list, the spread and propagation of linguistic changes. Whereas at the first stage, we are often overwhelmed with an excess, this is what he wrote, we are often overwhelmed with an excess of possible explanations. We have quite the reverse situation in attempting to account for the propagation and regularity of linguistic changes. And he wrote, the point of view of this present study is that the social pressures are continually operating upon languages, not from some remote point in the past, but as an imminent social force acting in the living present. So Bill carried out the Martha's Vineyard study in order to investigate this view of change, to operationalize how to explore it. In the remainder of my talk today, I'll be giving you a thumbnail sketch of the paper itself. But more importantly, I'll be exploring the context in which it was written, the incredibly deep and detailed scientific procedures that Bill carried out, and what we can still learn from it today. Now we come to the third problem, which is the regularity of change. So far as this third problem is concerned, the regularity of change, this is a demonstration of the entire study. So this will be what I'll try to explain over the next half hour or so. It all begins with Martha's Vineyard. You see the island located off the southeast corner of Massachusetts on the left, and a more close-up view on the right. In order to prepare for the Martha's Vineyard study, Bill had done a lot of preparation and for this research. Since this was the research on which his MA thesis was to be based, he was already grounded in the work that dialect geographers had done there in that area in the 1930s and reported in Linguistic Atlas of New England and other publications. So Corazza McDavid's had many publications that he was quite familiar with. And Bill's first trip there was in August of 1961. Now, in this first trip, he had noticed a particular pronunciation of the I diphthong, as in the word life, which we'll hear in a minute, and the ow diphthong is as in about. So here is life.
Life.
And here is a person saying all about.
All about.
This is quite interesting to me because Canadian English, which is my native version, is well known for raising and centralization in these diphthongs as well. So I find Martha's Vineyard to be quite good. Anyway, this represented a process whereby the first vowel of the diphthong was changing from something like to something more like So from life to life, being articulated from a more central position in the mouth. And this process is usually referred to as centralization or raising. I'll use these terms interchangeable, the two terms, throughout this talk. The process of saying these words involves raising your tongue, closing your mouth, and producing a sound where the first formant, F1, registers a lower number, reflecting your tongue moving forward in your mouth, and the second formant, F2, registers a higher number representing tongue height because your mouth is more closed. So this was indeed a retrograde change, in contrast to developments elsewhere in New England. Bill followed up with further fieldwork in October of 1961 and January 1962, including recording 69 speakers.
Life.
Sorry, that's the speaker.
All the well.
Sorry, those are those things again. And this was indeed a retrograde change in contrast to developments elsewhere in New England. So you can see that Bill was very familiar with the previous work and recognized it as such. The research was innovated both in terms of its purpose, the study of change as ongoing, and its methodology, using the language of everyday speech as the raw material for linguistic analysis. And these innovative ideas turned out to spawn the perfect way to discover language change in action. So what was the kind of methodology that Bill was using? Let me just get this organized here. Oh, here we go. My printer has betrayed me by, leaving out page 2. How that happened, I do not know. I got it. Okay. So the first innovation was the type recorder. No, this is the wrong page 2. I'm so sorry. Something has gone a bit wrong here. Let's go to what seems to be page 3. Okay, I've discovered where I am. I'm sorry for the delay. No, I haven't. I think I'm going to have to just go from the slides and say what I plan to say. So there was the methodology of this study was quite innovative in its use of the tape recorder. By the early 1950s, American linguists had begun to use the tape recorder to record the indigenous languages of North America. And these quotes are taken from Bill's Conversations with Strangers. So recording conversations rather than elicited words or phrases yielded data on speech in its natural context of language use. And my plan was to use this data to analyze the sound system. Now, in order to do so, he was going to have to use use a tape recorder, and also he wanted to use the K spectrograph to analyze the sounds. And he writes that he was a student in a course taught at Columbia University by Franklin Cooper of Haskins Laboratories. I asked him, writes Bill, whether the K sonograph could be adopted for studies of dialect differences in the field. He said no, the noise level in the field was too high. We found that slide again. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Nothing daunted, Bill was actually able to use his recordings and analyze the vowel sounds. But this was because of another instance of using the most high-powered technical innovation of that time, which was a top-of-the-line tape recorder. So he writes, I turned to the high-quality Nagra recorder recommended by my filmmaker friend Murray Lerner, and I found that my Martha's Vineyard recordings did allow me to study the entire range of speech sounds in the spoken language. And as I will explain later, he combined analyzing the data orally by his own coding and also checking against the sonograph, what the sonograph registered in terms of centralization. So I have to say a few words about Murray Lerner. Murray was a lifelong friend of Bill's from college days, and here's a photo of them from sometime in the 1970s, which was like 25 years after college. And they remained remained close friends for the whole rest of their lives. And Murray was a filmmaker. He was a very successful documentary filmmaker. Some of his films were Festival, Message to Love, and From Mao to Mozart, all on music. And he's the guy that recommended the Nagra to Bill. He said, this will give you a better sound quality than any other tape recorders that are being used at the time. Murray's Oscar-nominated film festival chronicled 4 crucial Newport folk festivals and captured things like Dylan going electric for the first time. And I think this is actually a great movie if anybody's interested in the history of rock festivals. But this was written as part of Murray's obituary in the Huffington Post. So Bill was never shy, was never reticent to give credit where credit was due. A few years ago, reflecting on his first fieldwork in Martha's Vineyard, Bill wrote, "In the Martha's Vineyard project, I had started out using the methods traditionally employed in research on English dialects, interviewing knowledgeable speakers, collecting words and phrases unique to that dialect, often traditional words that were going out of fashion, and describing the dialect and its particularities." Apparently, he was very much influenced by Murray's technique as a documentary filmmaker, engaging musicians and audience members in conversations that were interesting. Bill writes, "Here again, Murray's example steered me in a different direction on how to generate the conversations to be recorded. With his camera on his shoulder, Murray put questions to people that led them to speak about the most important issues in their lives. Now, listening again to the people I recorded more than 60 years ago, I'm transported into the living past as it moves ahead." So let's go back to Martha's Vineyard. I don't think Bill would have let me get any farther in this presentation before introducing 2 stalwarts of the Martha's Vineyard fishing community, Donald Poole and Everett Poole. Bill was 33 when he first went to Martha's Vineyard in 1961, and Donald Poole was 57. His is the voice we heard earlier saying life and about. Donald Poole died in 1984 at the age of 92, as we learned from his obituary, which did appear in the Boston Globe. Sadly, I don't have Donald's picture, but this is his son Everett when he was about 85. He died in 2022 at the age of 92. Everett, only a few years younger than Bill, had followed in his father's footsteps as a prominent community leader of Martha's Vineyard and the owner of several businesses, including a fish market. And I think from this photo of Everett, I imagine that he was struck from the same mold as his father. In fact, the way they talked was very, very similar, having listened to tapes of both of them. Donald Poole lives on in his last book, Conversations with Strangers, where Donald is one of the 10 people featured in the attached sound files. In these excerpts, we hear not only the sound of Donald's voice, but we also learn about his philosophy of living. In this, I've transcribed a recording that you'll hear in a minute, where Bill asks Donald, what reason do people have to work harder than they have to earn a living? I've said that's because Bill's voice being off mic is a little softer in this recording. I've also highlighted all the cases of the diphthongs that he was analyzing. So,
what reason do people have to work harder than they have to earn a living?
I can answer that for you, because I've already worked that up for myself and argued the point with many men. It's the satisfaction of feeling that you have accomplished something over and above the bare necessities of life. You take a pride and doing the best that you can according to your ability. I don't have to go fishing. I can quit right now and be comfortable. But just as long as I draw the breath of life, I'll be down in my boat in the morning at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, bound somewhere, doing all that I can, as best as I can, to the best of my ability and knowledge. Because I take a pride in doing that, something I know, and I feel that I'm doing something important. And I'm happier doing that than I would be sitting around the beach. A man with a New England conscience can't sit still and not produce something, as long as he has the ability to do it and the knowledge of how to do it. Does that answer your question?
Right down the line.
Keep this information on Donald Poole and Everett Poole in mind for a few minutes while I summarize how Bill analyzes the speech data and comes to the conclusions that he takes from it. As I mentioned earlier, the recording for this study was done on 3 field trips to Martha's Vineyard in 1961 and 1962. The analysis of the 2 diphthongs in the recorded speech of the 69 residents of Martha's Vineyard that Bill recorded includes 3,500 instances of I and 1,500 instances of ow. So the I diphthong was about 3 times as more frequent in the speech than ow was. The analysis begins with Bill's auditory coding of each instance of I or ow according to a 4-point scale of the raising of the nucleus, which is collapsed to a 3-point scale later on in the analysis. Each speaker's data is arranged on a separate page. So here is a partial display for one speaker, George Benson, including only the first 13 of the 40 lines in this chart. I should mention that in his master's thesis, quite a few more examples of these analyses are available, and we hope that this will be available before too long. So the analysis, let me see. Yeah. So we see, yeah, okay, explaining this slide. This is only the first 13 lines of the 40 lines in his chart, which you can get an idea of. A chart for every one of the 69 people, which each one of which was 3 times more than this, and it all represents how Bill heard these words. It's a lot of work. So on this chart, we see that there are 12 instances of the word right in Benson's recorded speech. That's at the top left of the chart. So those 2 little X's mean at the 0 level of centralization, there were 2 cases. At the first level, there were 4 cases. And at the second level, there are, I think, 7 cases. So each word is mentioned by a number of little crosses. And this was all, by the way, typed out on a typewriter and spaced out on a typewriter. And the only copies we have of the thesis right now are a couple of carbon copies that were also in the typewriter at the time. No computers, no Xeroxing, no technology that we know today. So these charts are quite precious. The words are grouped according to the phonological environment. So all the words from right down through quite have voiceless obstruents following them. Afterwards, you get to some fricatives like wife, life, knife, and then spider starts the series of voiced segments coming after the vowel in question. So from these, Bill constructed for each subject a centralization index. Sometimes he calls it CI in the text of the paper. So the centralization index for George Benson for AY diphthongs was 0.75. His index for the AW diphthongs was much less than that, 0.39. This is quite typical. On the other charts, we see also that AY diphthong was more advanced in the speech of the community at this time than the AW diphthong. And so it is later on, Bill sorted the data by a whole lot of univariate analyses. Is it social class? Is it, well, instead of just talking, I will read what I wrote about this chart. I wrote, there are many amazing things to note about this chart. First, although only the first 13 lines are represented on the slide, the entire chart includes 100 instances of I, 63 instances of OW for this one speaker. Second are the number of conclusions drawn from this and the other 68 charts that Bill has created. Because each speaker gets a centralization score, this allows the speakers to be compared according to their individual social characteristics. So he was able to show that men centralize more than women. Of the three major ethnic groups on the island, the descendants of the first Yankee settlers, such as Donald Poole and his son, centralize more than the descendants of either the original population of Wampanoag Indians speaking an Algonquian language, which is no longer spoken in the area, or the later Portuguese-speaking arrivals. Of course, there are important generational differences underlying the inferences about phonological change that can be drawn. And we should note here that there also are real-time comparisons to be made based on the Linguistic Atlas of New England, data from 30 years before the study. What if these analyses were flawed by Bill's own possibly flawed hearing in assigning each instance to one of these levels, one of the three levels? Following the creation of the charts for each speaker, he devises a way to check his assignment of degree of raising based on his hearing with the data derived from spectrographic analysis, spectrographic measurements. So I'm mentioning this in order to encourage anybody who finds that understanding of this last diagram I'll show you is a step too far. Do not skip it when you read the paper. The chart represents the data from only 7 male speakers, 2 of whose data are colored blue, a 15-year-old, and red, which is 33-year-old Everett Poole, the son of Donald. I told you we'd get back to him. So these show the first and second formats for each of the same data points. So the numbers on the chart represents one token that was assigned to that level by Bill auditorially. So you'll see the numbers 3 up there in the upper right, a lot of number 2s in the middle, and 1s and 0s. Actually, these charts were made when he still was looking at the 4 levels he had originally assigned. And the curves represent the best idea of where the boundaries are according to the spectrographic measurements. And you can see that the auditory, the ones done by audition by Bill turned out to be pretty good. And it was not possible in that time for him to measure thousands of spectrographic analyses. The process was very slow. In fact, I mentioned earlier that these K-sonograph was invented in Bell Labs in northern New Jersey. And even in my day at Penn in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Lee Lisker, our phonetician, was taking his students up to Haskins Labs to work with the sonograph instead of having a sound booth or other such things present in our own department. So back to this chart, other factors influencing centralization are also tested. Phonetic conditioning, for example, voiceless segments, voiceless succeeding consonants tend to encourage centralization better than voiced, voiceless better than voiced. So right is more likely to co-occur with centralization than a voice consonant like ride. Men are more likely to use centralized diphthongs. And I said before, people that are the descendants of the first settlers are more likely to do it as well. Dividing the speakers up by various social dimensions, including occupation, education, age groups, location on the island, and so on, yielded the result that the shift toward raising or centralization of these diphthongs began in Donald Poole's generation. Islanders over the age of about 60 had not yet participated in the change, and that it continued through the next generations. You can see on the chart that 15-year-old George Mayhew is ahead, the blue things, of Everett Poole, and Everett turns out to have been one of the central users of this form for his generation. But the biggest favor driving the change required the kind of insight that can only come from good fieldwork, immersion in the community, absorbing what people do and say. That turned out to be a factor intangible to anyone who does not value what strangers have to teach them. Someone quite the opposite of Bill. He takes very seriously the dire economic situation of the community, their dependence on summer people who are all at the same time hiring them to do construction work and at the same time buying up properties and selling them at prices that the locals can't afford. So this was a community under considerable economic stress at the time. And although some of the high school students Bill interviewed felt they could afford to try and stay on the island and make a go of living there, many others felt that they would have to leave. So the paper ends with a stunning conclusion. He writes, although orientation to the island is a stronger determining factor than any other in sorting people according to their tendency to centralize, I and OW are, quote, not salient in the consciousness of Vineyard speakers. But before I keep on telling you what he said about it, I'll show you the result. As I said, he sorted those 69 people according to many different possible categorizations. But then he ended up finding out that the most salient factor was how they were oriented to the island, whether they planned to stay, whether they felt loyal to the island, or that all the young people in the high school said they loved living on Martha's Vineyard, but many of them said they probably wouldn't be able to stay there because they wouldn't find a job. So we see that the people who had a positive orientation to the island, those 40 people, had the centralization issues of index of 0.63 with I, much higher than did the neutral people or the negative people who were negative did not share this language change. And for the rightmost column should be OW, not I. So sorry about the typos. So Bill casts his net a little wider at this point. He says, okay, I tried everything. It's orientation to the island that is the best factor saying who is centralizing and who is not. But he says, let's take a broader view of the Martha's Vineyard's way of speaking. He writes, there are no less than 14 phonological variables which follow the general rule that the higher or more constricted variants are characteristic of the Up Island native speakers. I didn't tell you about Up Island is actually to the southwest, and it's where the fishing community lives. Up Island, the people who are Up Island native speakers, native meaning native in terms of the generations before them, while the lower, more open variants are characteristic of Down Island speakers under mainland influence. We can reasonably assume that this closed mouth articulation interacts with linguistic structures at this point through the construction of the constriction of several dimensions of phonological space. That's a quote from Bill. He said, there seems to be this stress on a closed mouth articulation. Bill leaves us with the thought that such speculation is early, but it's in fact plausible. It's a plausible speculation that would require a lot of research to test out in a variety of English dialects and other languages. In other words, here we go. It's a plausible speculation that maybe there is something going on with this closed mouth articulation. We should go ahead and do some more research. So he left us with the legacy saying, do some more work. Let's keep at it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And again, very much on time. So great paper. And open for comments, questions, discussion. The applause keeps coming.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm looking for raised hands for questions or comments.
Would you like them to see you now? What? Would you like them to see you now? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Richard?
Daughter says that I can put myself up on the screen now, that I'm not stammering
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay. Yeah. And if somebody needs the slides
No.
again, we can
Okay.
always go back. But yeah, Rich.
Thank you.
Gillian,
Bye, Rich.
I'm so happy to hear that there's a manuscript preserved because
Yes.
John Singler told me he had gone to the Columbia Library and he couldn't find a copy of Bill's dissertation.
It's
from
taken me 9 months. I just got it.
Really?
mean, I've only been working with one of these very poor carbon copies. But actually I managed to persuade our wonderful linguistics librarian at Penn to get a copy on interlibrary loan, and he's gotten it for me. So I'll be working, Sherry and I will be working on that. We have been working on it. This miserable old copy we have. It's all retyped now, but there's a lot still to be done. Thanks. And thanks for your talk as well, Rich. It was great.
Thank you.
Others? Other questions or comments?
If I
Yeah,
could
Rich.
just,
Okay, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead. There's no one else, so go ahead.
I'm just so
And then
so
Kathleen
like
after.
the ingenuity and determination that yeah, just love to
Mhm.
see personal connections with his friend Murray, and yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure to me to be able to do this, and that's why I'm very grateful for having had the invitation, although I was pretty nervous about it. But thank you.
Yeah. So, Rich, since you just spoke, I'm going to ask Kathleen first,
sure.
and then you second. There should be time for both. Kathleen?
Sorry, thank you. No, that was such a fascinating study that you presented. I'm curious about, it was probably a little early for this, but when you're talking about the teenage sort of person who's acquiring like a diglossia and a dialect based on register, does the study of attitudes get involved in that? You know, a lot of times with teenage talk, that's such a wealth of, you know, why do they or do they not speak like the people in their surroundings? And a lot of it just has to do with, they know it's arbitrary, they know the language, but they're kind of copying each other, which is sort of fascinating. So I was wondering, does the study of attitudes become a factor in this? And if so, how is it structured?
Well, I think that attitudes are very, certainly you talked a lot about attitudes towards the language and also towards the community. There are many quotes in the longer thesis from speakers talking about their attitudes towards Martha's Vineyard and their attitudes towards mainlanders and so forth. There's quite a lot of conflict involving the summer visitors who would come and swamp the place, as they still do. So attitudes, as far as studying teenage talk per se, I should note that many of the high school students that appeared in this, there were 15 to 18-year-olds, I think he worked with, part of their data is from reading passage. He devised a reading passage, which he told them he was asking them to read for some, I don't know, purpose or other. And it contained a lot of these words so that he would get a lot of instances of the pronunciation of the words in the reading passage. I have never, not yet, listened to any of the interviews with the teenagers. So he certainly did not record like peer groups talking to each other. It was often in family situations. You would be at the dinner table, you could hear a married couple and maybe their kids talking a bit, but I think that when he said, keep up the good work and let's find out more about other situations, he would be happy to know that there's so much work being done already now by a lot of different researchers in sociolinguistics about teenage linguistic varieties and how they fit in with the rest of the community.
Okay, so we'll move on to Rich and then Catherine.
A question and a comment on the Nagra. It's probably an impossible social situation that there could be someone, a tourist from the mainland, who hangs out with kids and they have enough time that they spend with them and they like them, so they start changing their vowels. This basically couldn't happen, I think, socially, right?
I don't think he was really hanging out with kids too much. It turned out that the Fisher fishermen's community was the major source of this, and he hung out a lot with fishermen, I mean, on the boats and stuff like that.
Oh, I mean, but some random tourist couldn't get into this community and pick up the
Yeah,
chain.
if you listen to the interviews, he was no random tourist.
Yeah.
I mean, he spent the rest of his life really he had a great deal of respect for just everybody. And I will say that in the last year of his life, Bill just still wanted to keep on meeting strangers and talking to them and valuing their opinions. Betsy Sneller writes that one time when she was a student of Bill, she was his last PhD. After he'd been to England, we had been on a trip to England not very long ago. I don't know if it was 5 or 6 years ago. And Bill's major idea that he would go there was not getting a medal from the British Linguistic Society, which he did, but wandering around in one of the big parks in London trying to find people to interview. And he found a great guy. And he came back and he said to Becky, "Guess what? I just did my 1000th interview." And insisted on talking to her about this man that he'd met who was a musician and a photographer, and what great time he had. So he was like that in Martha's Vineyard too. And of course, he was only 33 the first time. He was not the elderly person you knew.
Yeah. About the Nagra, I don't know if you know the movie Diva, or that's the Quebec pronunciation, Diva, the New Age French movie. So there's the postier Jules, who records secretly, an opera singer who doesn't want to be recorded. And later, a young woman he meets, he shows her the tape recorder, and she starts to touch it. And he says, "No, touche pas. C'est un Nagra, c'est suisse et très précis."
Okay, Bill's biggest adventure was he once lost one on the metro in Paris.
Oh, no.
Many years later, but and he didn't go in for secret recordings either.
No,
Okay.
I mean,
Catherine?
Maybe Catherine's.
Catherine, you're on mute if you are speaking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, there.
Actually,
Good.
two things. I mean, first off, working with vowels. Vowels are slippery creatures, especially in English, because they're in the middle of the mouth. In French, they're more towards the edges, and foreigners have a lot of trouble figuring out the space that these vowels are going to come to. So, and yet that's what he chose to study. Or did he choose to study that just because he heard it?
Well, I think for this, which is his master's essay, he hadn't made very many choices. He went to this place and found out there was something interesting going on and decided to study it for that reason. But I'm not a phonetician. I can't answer all the questions about vowel analysis. It's not part of what I've done in my career.
Yeah.
So, no, but I think, like as I said again, once this becomes available, the answer to many questions will be in that document.
Yeah, well, he heard something and he said, "I'm going to look at it." So
Yeah,
it was
right.
evident to him.
He heard it,
Yeah.
and then the hearing matched the spectrographic analysis, which
Yeah.
was pretty good. That meant that he could then use. It might never have been finished if he had to do the spectrographic analysis on all those vowels, but he was able to use the ones he had coded himself because he'd been able to find that his coding was good enough. So, thank you.
And one more question, which follows up on Kathleen's. Isn't it really a question of identity and intention? If the people who have a positive opinion of staying on the island and want to stay, that's their intention. So they're going to speak the way those people will speak.
Probably, but it's not the way the grandparents spoke. There was a change going on in the whole community. So it wasn't just teenagers kind of deciding to be different. That's the best I can say. I wasn't there, so it's hard to say.
It's absolutely fascinating. Your presentation was absolutely. I'm probably not going to sleep tonight. I'll be thinking.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you very much.
Especially it's in America, because in England people go to a specific public school and they have to adopt the accent of that school, so they'll speak one form of English. with that group of friends. And then when they go home, they may even have working class parents and they'll speak working class English. So they're speaking two languages, but they're very aware of it. And it's
Bill-
a social.
He had a lot of, Peter Trudgill, for example, who's done so much important work in England, was very early. I think Peter and I found ourselves at the first NWAVE meeting in 1972, I believe. And so he started doing these kind of studies in many parts of England, as many other people have since. So it's been, you'd have to go read their stuff.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. No, but I was surprised it's America, so it's interesting, particularly interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last chance. Any final questions or comments? Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you very much, Gillian.
Thank
And
you,
I
Sheila,
don't
very
know.
much. Good to see
Yeah.
you, and thank you for your helpful overseeing of this session.